Hey guys, welcome to the Deeper Bible Podcast. We're a show about God's wisdom for everyone. We want to go really deep into the scriptures, into big ideas in theology and philosophy, and also practical living for today. And hey, if this conversation is helpful for you, do us a favor, click like, subscribe, leave a comment, do all the things. That would be very helpful. My name is Ryan, and today we're going to talk about a very big question with a special guest. The big question is this: why does theology matter? I mean, there's a lot of problems in the world that need active engagement. Got to go do something physically. Why should we pause to think deeply about God? The special guest to guide us through this terrain is Miroslav Volf, a celebrated theologian from Yale University who's written scores of books about how theology lands in the real world. And if you're curious about some of his books, I've got a stack. Screenshot this if you're watching this, and you can look them up. Some of my favorite books, and we'll talk about some of those today. Professor Volf also was part of my doctoral program. He was on the committee for my general exams and also for my dissertation. And so, Miroslav, thank you for being here. It's great to see you.
It's great to see you, and every time we talk, it's a good thing.
Thank you. You're joining us from your office in New Haven at Yale University, yes?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Well, let's jump right into it. Here's the big question, and you can approach it however you'd like. I have an idea of how you'll answer it, but here's the question nonetheless: why does theology matter?
It's a very simple question, and really for many theologians not so easy to answer. Actually, my sense is very, very simple because of two things. God is the thing that absolutely matters the most.
Mm-hmm.
And because the way in which we live our lives and how we spend our days on this planet matter for us and our lives the most. When you put these two together, what is the ultimate value, which is God, and what is the ultimate calling that we have, which is to live lives worthy of our humanity or lives to the glory of God, then the answer seems to be theology is important because it gives us the best possible resources how to live life that is truly life.
There's a lot there. Let me ask you a follow-up question, and this is a famously tricky question, but you're talking about what matters, or something that has meaning, ultimate meaning. What is the meaning of meaning? Like, how would you even define what matters in the kind of intellectual milieu in which we live? How do you approach that?
There are folks who think that this whole question of the meaning of life is kind of a meaningless question, and
Right.
maybe some of your listeners may have similar kinds of intuitions. But I think that it's very simple, at least for me, way I experience it. You can use the words like the flourishing life. You can use words like the good life. You can use life in accordance with God's designs. You can use the word faithfulness to our own calling, the purpose to which we were called, in varieties of ways. None of them mean exactly the same, but all of them get at that very significant question, namely, we have a life, we live it before God, we live it for God, and therefore we have to have a sense of the shape of that life and direction of that life, how it adds up to be fulfilling in the way in which God has designed it.
And then that would apply if I'm an accountant, I'm a plumber, I'm a stay-at-home mom, I'm a computer coder. I still would have a theology. Yes.
Yes, absolutely. I think I would make a distinction, and the distinction is that there is a kind of a general calling for all, and then there is a kind of specific calling for each. A general calling is the calling to, I'll use slightly different terminology now than before, to walk in the footsteps of Christ, to make Christ to be paradigm of our lives, and in this way fulfill our calling as human beings. Now, there are specific callings, that is to say, how each of us in our own daily lives should fulfill that calling. And that's where we come in as professional theologians, as plumbers, as accountants, as
Mm-hmm.
street sweepers, as
Mm-hmm.
physicists, you name it,
Mm-hmm.
varieties of
Mm-hmm.
callings that we might have. They then become a particular way in which, in this place, in this time, with this set of responsibilities that I have, I can fulfill that one calling to follow Jesus Christ. So
Mm-hmm.
we'll have to learn specific things, how it applies to my life in very
Mm-hmm.
specific kinds of ways. And that
Mm-hmm.
might be different for an accountant than it is for the garbage collector.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How did it emerge for you? When did your own inklings that your specific calling might be to the Logos? And was there any trial and error in
No,
discerning
this
what
is
your
this
own?
is kind of a crazy thing. It started basically when I kind of consciously embraced my faith. I was a child of a minister. My father was a Pentecostal minister, and I was a rebellious child in certain period of my life. I just couldn't wait for um, me to get out of the house so I can live my life as I wish to live it, rather than being under not only under what I experienced as a thumb of that transcendent God, but under the eye of all these people who are just watching for me to fail as a preacher's kid so that they can gossip about my father.
I feel that. My dad is a Pentecostal pastor. I feel it. Hence, I've become a theologian too.
So in some sense, it's understandable that I had this phase. But when I was 16, for various reasons, I embraced a faith fully.
Mhm.
And at that time, I was rather well known in my high school, but I was also the only openly professing Christian kid
Mhm.
in high school in a officially socialist communist society. So it was just disorienting
Did that
for
feed
people.
into your rebellious streak a little bit? Like for me, I really embraced Christianity when I lived in Jerusalem, which is a minority Christian town,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
I
yeah,
kind of felt like, okay, everybody else is Muslim and Jewish, but not me. So
yeah.
was it part of your rebellion to be?
Well,
Uh,
it's no, well, it then became that. But my rebellion was against faith because I somehow wanted to blend, wanted to
yeah.
be as my fellow folks are, and partly because I think I experienced the church as, they're a particular set of people, and it's so in every church. And by the way, I came to appreciate that later. You have people who you have in that church. And when I was growing up, a teenager, I thought, why is my father spending all this time wasting his time for these dim-witted people that have all sorts of problems? Can't he find something better to do with his time? I kind of despise the kind of the varieties of humanity, of who we as
Mm,
human beings
mm,
are, that were
mhm,
in the church.
mhm,
And so I wanted to get away for it to some kind of so I can live a life that is untouched by this kind of a mess that was there. But later I became come to realize this is really the greatness of my father's calling.
mm,
He's there, like Christ is there,
mhm,
for everyone. No
mhm,
matter who you are, you're
mhm,
equally precious in God's sight. I've got to take care of you
mhm,
spiritually and in other ways. I then realized there is no better, greater calling than being a minister of this sort, at such close proximity to people, to their joys, to their sorrows. I've come then to appreciate the work of a minister as this highest calling.
mm,
So much so that later on I realized it's just beyond my capacities.
mm,
And I found that when people were responding, they were responding better to my scholarly publications or
mm,
what I have written than they were to what I was able to give them in concrete ways,
Mhm.
whether when I was preaching or when I was kind of working with them. And so that I kind of sorted for myself
Mhm.
then the calling with a lot of actually with a lot of careful thought and
Mhm.
prayer. I actually had to get a permission
Mm.
to do what I'm doing because
Mm.
I felt that I was kind of betraying an important
Mm.
side, at least, of my calling. And I remember to this day a walk that I had with a Catholic Benedictine monk in Venice, and I asked him whether it's okay for me to be theologian and to leave
Mm.
for Yugoslavia, go to the States and
Mm.
teach. And
Mm.
I then received his blessing,
Mm.
and that's what set me uh, free.
And how old were you, when you took that
By
walk?
that time, so that was already I already the done education. I've gotten my PhD by that time, so
Oh,
I
wow.
knew that I was, but it was all wrapped up with being a minister in churches in former Yugoslavia,
Mhm.
because the calling was not just then to be educated as a theologian, but to do what the pastor slash theologian might do, taking care of the people as my father has had
Mhm.
done, as well as teaching and doing variety of ministerial work. And that was what I returned to back in Yugoslavia with a PhD from Germany, and then pretty soon realized that at least in the setting which I was, somehow resonances were not there, and that was a kind of a tension
Mhm.
that I felt and needed to be released from what I felt was God's calling, but this was turning out not to be quite
Mm.
that.
Mm.
And then, yeah,
I obviously, I just finished a doctorate 3 years ago now. I'm pastor at a church and
yeah, I was in
working
a
on my own
situation as
calling.
you were.
So I'm curious just to how long did it take for you to clarify? How long were you
um,
back at the church after you had your doctorate before you started to say, I'm not sure that maybe I should be a full-time academic theologian?
yeah, I think it took me about so let's see, so about 4 years, 5 years,
Okay.
um,
Okay.
in which I was genuinely trying both to teach in that small school that was in Osijek, in town in which I was born, regularly preach
Mhm.
in churches and teach.
Mhm.
Um, Sundays I would travel to small village churches. I would preach to 20
Mm.
um, older farmers
Mhm.
in the church, and which I thought was absolutely beautiful calling. It just I wasn't quite. Um, I wasn't the kind of person that could do that
Mhm.
well. Maybe I was. I've been um, decultured. Is that a term? Maybe I have culturally alienated myself a bit
Yeah.
from that environment
Yeah.
of relatively simple, uneducated people. And whenever I opened my mouth, something else came than what they were used to
Right.
hearing. I wasn't putting things in the way in which they found congenial
Right.
to them. Somehow they felt there was a cultural almost distance. They liked me as a person.
Mhm.
That was not an issue. They liked me even as a Christian. That wasn't an issue.
Mhm.
It was more whether I was able to truly minister to them.
Right. Right. Thank you for sharing that.
Mm.
That's personally helpful and insightful. Um, and if you're watching this and you go to the Bay Church, don't leave any mean comments about my preaching in the chat. Okay.
Oh, I heard you preach. You're amazing. I love it. I love what you're doing.
I want to pivot a little bit. A lot of your work as a theologian subsequently has been writing. You're a gifted writer, and your writing has blessed me, a lot of my friends. Talk to me about the connection between theology and writing. Does one who is a theologian is writing intrinsic to that? Are there non-writing theologians? What is the role of intellectual language and constructions and vision How is that related to the theological task?
I would say that there are varieties of theologians. I think earlier you mentioned, maybe in introductory remarks, that actually every Christian is a theologian,
Hmm.
which is to say, every Christian thinks about the nature and character of God,
Hmm.
Jesus Christ, and thinks about how that nature of who God is, who Christ is, how they're related to our lives and what our lives should look like in the light of who God is. Any work of that sort, any thinking of that sort is theological
Hmm.
thinking. You don't need to be trained for it. Read your Bible, and when you read your Bible, you're doing already
Hmm.
a certain kind of theological work. And sometimes I find that what my colleague here, poet Christian Wyman,
Yeah.
has called accidental theologians. He has a class that he used to
Oh,
teach. I'm not sure when he taught it the last time. He called them accidental theologians, and that is to say people who are active in kind of culturally intellectual sphere and careful about their faith without having theological degrees,
right.
and therefore articulate it in ways maybe that are appealing to people who do not have theological degrees. So
Hmm.
somebody like Marilyn Robinson might be named
Hmm.
as an accidental
Hmm.
theologian, a very good accidental theologians. Other
Yes.
Dorothy Sawyer or even C.S. Lewis,
Yeah.
in some ways, were just such accidental theologians, which is fine. So you've got these ordinary people, you've got these accidental theologians, all great. You've got theologians who do mainly their job is teaching
Hmm.
rather than writing.
Yeah.
That's a wonderful
Yes.
ministerial kind of work of a theologian, whether they do it in church or they do it at the college kinds of settings. Very, very important, I think.
Hmm.
And you have theologians then also who write, who articulate or summarize the faith for today, or sometimes even to push and
Mm.
study issues that haven't been sufficiently illuminated, that have arisen in time, but we don't have sufficient resources to address them. So the broad spectrum of what it means to be a theologian, and I'm not sure which kind of theologian I was called. I
Mm.
kind of follow Moltmann's advice to me. Jürgen Moltmann was my doctoral supervisor. As you know, he died about 3 weeks ago
Mhm.
at the age of 98, and was pretty sharp even at the time of his death. When I finished my doctoral dissertation, I came to me and said, Jürgen, um, I know how to write a dissertation, but how do I become a theologian? What do I do?
Mm.
And I saw him. He was amazing as a theologian, especially amazing at presenting faith even to those who do not believe and finding resonance. I'll give you one example. I was with him in Beijing, large conference, which was something analogous to World Economic Forum. There's a Beijing Forum,
Mm.
and a variety of offerings there, and keynote plenary address. 3,000 people in the large hall. That would be what I would have guessed. 95% nothing to do with the Christian faith.
Mhm.
He gave a talk in which I could recognize features of his specifically deeply Christian theology, but he packaged it in such a way that after he finished, there was a standing ovation.
Mm. Wow.
And I think, that's what I want.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
amazing, right?
Yeah.
And before that experience, but that just to illustrate how close to life his theology is. So I
Yeah.
asked him, Jürgen, what do I do? I said,
Yeah.
tell me, how do I become a theologian? And he said, take an issue that moves people
Mhm.
and shed the light of the gospel on it.
Mhm.
Very simple, right?
Mhm.
It's not so
Mhm.
simple to do, but it's a beautiful thing, right? There's something that's a pressing issue,
Mhm.
and assume that in the gospel there is there are resources to address it. Have
Mhm.
patience to dig into to find those resources, and then shed the light on this
Mhm.
that would guide people in facing that issue. That's what I took for myself then to be
Mhm.
a kind of basic rule how I approach theology. And that meant that sometimes um, those issues were old issues that needed clarification, but sometimes they were pressing issues, mainly for me, they were pressing issues of the day
Hmm.
that I felt needed to be illuminated, needed to be kind of set aright from the side perspective of the gospel. And that's how I did most of my work.
Hmm. And as you do that work, as you shine your light, as the gospel light comes onto whatever the topic is that moves people, when you think about clarifying it, who are you doing that for? I've been in my own life thinking about trying to think about writing as a gift, or this is part of
Yeah,
my giving. This is not for me. This is not journaling. This is for others.
yeah,
Um, but how have you approached the question of audience and
yeah.
who are you writing for? And this is a leading question because for me, part of the itch is the enormous gap that's often there between the very rich intellectual world of the academy, but that can be spiritually dry, and
Mm,
then
mm.
the often theological wasteland of the local church. It's like there's almost not a theology at all to speak of, but it's spiritually vibrant. And does writing theologically play a role to amend that gap? But maybe I've said too much. How do you think about who you're writing for?
That's a very good question for me. Uh, I think you're a more emotionally intelligent writer than I am when I read your what you write. I cannot, for life of me, place myself in a situation of a kind of identifiable audience
Hmm,
and write for them. I don't know how to do that, so I
hmm,
never do that.
hmm,
And when I've tried, it sounded stilted. It sounded like
hmm.
it just wasn't right. Like I was trying to like I was a what comes to mind, like a grandpa's trying to talk kind of adolescent English or something like that, right? So you have this specifically linguistic subculture which I was
Yeah, yeah,
trying
yeah,
to
yeah,
address,
yeah.
which and it just was not working. So for me, the best way that I most fitting to my own temperament, I write about issues that
Mm,
move me at a deep existential level.
hmm,
I mean, I sometimes write things that are intellectually interesting tidbits that need to be resolved that I have questions about. But I write about what I observe in life, what then moves me, what troubles me, what I see in myself
hmm,
as how those issues bear upon my life. I'll give you an example. The most recent book that I wrote, the title is "The Cost of Ambition:
hmm,
Why Striving to Be Better Than Others Makes Us Worse."
hmm,
So this is a kind of motivation of striving for superiority, of
hmm,
being better than others, right? And I saw very few people are worried too much about that. Very few people write about this these days. It used to be an important issue, never central, but really, really important. And then I observed in my own life and in the life of my students. I observe in my life that I walk through life and I compare myself, what kind of shoes I wear, what kind
hmm,
of a dress I have, and kind of rank better and worse. And I'm going through this life, and I'm in this comparison mode, and I think this is crazy.
hmm,
Why am I comparing these things?
hmm,
Why can't I just normally let everybody be who they are? Why can't I just strive for what I think is right rather than comparing myself? The same in all domains of life. Consequences it has for how we think about ourselves can be devastating.
hmm,
I'm always inadequate. Then because there's somebody who's better. Consequences it has for things that I have. A perfectly fine shirt.
hmm.
If it goes a little bit out of fashion and somebody has a little bit better, or if somebody has the same shirt, even or dress, right?
Yeah, yeah,
It gets devalued.
yeah,
But if you think about it, that's insane.
yeah. Right.
F-
Literally.
and so this is now my question.
Mhm,
So now Moltmann's advice: what is the shine the light of the gospel
mm,
on this? And so comes a book on striving for superiority, a critique of it.
Hmm.
And if you look carefully, then you see, say, the Apostle Paul, a lot of his thought was actually about that very question.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
it comes alive when you read it. It suddenly means you read Kierkegaard. He's been writing about the issue. You read Milton, Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained
Hmm.
at the center of his attack, and so forth, you know? And so
Yeah.
I get excited about
Yeah.
it. I write about it, and that's how books come about. But and then again, the question should be, for whom are you writing that book? And
Yeah.
I just the right way and trying to make it as understandable as I can.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. In the
That's
publishing.
unhelpful, I know.
No, no, no.
But
It actually is very helpful. It's also freeing because the publishing industry has so many pressures in terms of word count and various formulaic ways of approaching writing that at some point you just want to let a match to the whole thing and just say, whatever, I'm
yeah,
just going to go,
yeah, yeah.
just going to write. I'm very curious about spiritual backfire moments where I'm trying to do one thing, but actually the result is maladaptive. It leads me in the other direction. And I think ambition, if I'm understanding you right, hubris, the drive to ascendancy. It's not key distinction. I think it's not the drive to excel in
No,
general or to be excellent in general. It's the better than movement. It's the
correct.
comparison movement, and I suppose that plays out in both individual and collective ego. The behavior of groups could also probably exemplify, I guess, this sort of move. But walk us through that.
Your own teacher, your own teacher, Doug Levinson,
Yeah,
in his book about God's love, has that analysis goes exactly in the way in which you were describing
maybe I
when
ripped it off of him. I don't know.
when God kind of speaks to Israel. Why did God choose Israel?
Uh-huh.
Not because you were more
Great, and
numerous,
yep,
more generally better than any of the other nations, and then the term that is being used is basically because I have fallen in love with you.
right.
And then Levinson adds to this: this is so that Israel would not feel superiority
Uh-huh.
on the basis of some quality that it has qua people that
Uh-huh.
God chooses. And
Uh-huh.
so you have this act
Hmm.
of grace
Hmm.
that is enacted in choice that undercuts the claims to superiority,
Mhm. Mhm.
which is fascinating thing. He does the same thing with Abraham, because
Mhm.
Abraham is also just called and doesn't give you information about why he was called,
Right.
and
Right.
so all sorts of people supply those
Right.
reasons.
Right.
He's been very zealous and destroyed the idols of his
Right.
father,
Right. Right.
or
Right.
he, as we see when he negotiated the deal with God about Sodom and Gomorrah, he's a good arguer, or
Yeah.
something of that sort must have
Yeah,
been
yeah,
in
yeah.
him.
Yeah.
Levinson rightly pushes against that idea. That's just like with the call of Israel, so it is also with the call of the progenitor of the people of God.
Right. Right. Levinson's quip about Abraham is that he starts off as a good Lutheran, but he ends up as a Catholic because at the beginning he's chosen for no reason at all. But by
Yeah,
the
yeah,
end, the Akedah in Genesis 22, and he's offering his son, and then the angel says, Yan ki asher asita ze, because you've done this, therefore I
yeah,
shall bless you. And it's a works
yeah,
righteousness by the
yeah.
end.
There we go. There we go.
But
Maybe.
yeah, no, but our church right now, we're studying through Romans,
Yeah,
and sometimes the reflexive contrast between law and grace, Old Testament, New Testament. It's like something like Abraham or the election of Israel is a great entree to say, no, this is profound grace. This is,
yeah.
radical gift. And but how Miroslav does one? I don't know if you touch on this in your book. How do you guard yourself against the cost of ambition? I'm an ambitious person. It's a difference between seeing it, oh, that can happen, but then how do I in my life not become a casualty of ambition?
Well, one of the things that, or the internal spiritual disciplines for me is to interpret everything who I am and what I do as being made possible by God's agency in my life.
Mhm.
In some sense, it isn't mine.
Mhm.
And we don't even need to invoke God to ask
Mhm.
the question, how much of Miroslav is actually has Miroslav has nothing to do with?
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, Different gifts that I have received that somebody else hasn't, set of character, early education, exposure to this or that, even my capacity to work and want to work. I mean,
Mhm.
there are all sorts of people who are very smart who don't have this kind of disciplined way, which I don't think I have particularly learned. I was born with it. I
Yeah.
cannot stand an unfinished product,
Mhm.
right? Is that should I tap myself on the shoulders for
Mhm.
that, or should I say this kind of strange confluence of gifts that I've received? They explain more, much more,
Mm.
what I have done than some kind of my own thing that I can
Mm.
uh, exclusively ascribe to me. And if I start ascribing anything to myself, then I think I just want to be careful. I don't want to ascribe to myself and claim for myself as my own contribution something that isn't. And so, because I'm in the dark, maybe when I go into heaven, God will tell me, 5% of what you did here is your thing, and the rest, somebody else's contribution. But I have no idea how to make that judgment. And so
Mhm.
basically, I say, I invoke this passage by Paul when in 1 Corinthians 4, um, he talks to people who have this tendency toward being superior, wanting him to be the superior apostle. And he asked the rhetorical question, what do you have that
Mhm.
you have not received?
Mhm.
And expected answer is nothing, because the next
Mhm.
question is, and if you have received it, why do you boast?
Mhm. Yeah.
And
Mm.
that to me is a
Yeah.
kind of stance that I am nurturing
Mhm.
all the time. When the temptation of comparison and the kind of sense, oh, you can compare yourself in order to what's the kind of relative what is possible to be done,
Yeah.
but not that somehow this redounds to me being better than somebody else.
Right. Or the
Uh,
worst side of that, someone in your shoes is frankly more often than not on the better side of the margin,
sure,
but
exactly,
doing
exactly.
comparison can lead you to be more often than not on the losing side of the comparison, and
That
then that
too,
that creates
absolutely.
a whole different spiritual pathology.
Yeah, the kind of in majority of cases, that's what then ends up happening, because there's always somebody who's better than we are. You're constantly having this
Right.
deflatory
Right. Right.
comparative experience,
Right. Right.
and then of course it pushes you in all sorts of different unhealthy directions.
Yeah, and even if you have preeminence in your little sphere or of amongst all people living at one time, all you have to do is read history,
Yeah,
and then
yeah,
all of a sudden you've brought it to the conference, and now you're certainly not. I'm reading about just last night. I started a book on Theodore Roosevelt,
yeah,
and
yeah,
I mean, just I don't know what kind of a human being he is. The amount of energy and intellect and drive. It's like
yeah,
you're a different species. I could never.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I have that experience all of the times.
Mhm. Mhm. Let me ask you, you use a metaphor about the life of the theologian in your book, For the Life of the World, Theology That Makes a Difference, and you talk about theologians as pilgrims. Theologians are pilgrims. Do you remember writing about that?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay. Um, I
yeah,
have actually on my desk, I've written that down, just that phrase, theologian as pilgrim. And for me, it really reminds me what I'm doing. And not for, if you're listening, not a pilgrim in the sort of the colonial sense, but more the religious journeyer sense. And when I lived in Israel, somebody told me the difference between a tourist and a pilgrim is
mm,
that a tourist is a consumer of experience, a pilgrim is transformed by the destination.
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
said to
No,
myself, I don't wanna just be a consumer, click, 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 click. I wanna be transformed. But can you talk a little bit about that idea of theologian as pilgrim. And yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think you've put it very, very beautifully. Um, you can be either kind of tourist, or you can be um, a or kind of intellectual tourist,
Yeah.
collector of
Yes.
intellectual capital, intellectual capitalist,
Yes.
or something like that, so
Yeah.
that you just increase the knowledge that you have of the command of the field, and simply
Mm,
understanding of the world, whichever way you want to put it. It would seem to me that anytime one speaks about God, it is a kind of self-involving discourse, meaning by that, I am always talking about how I and how the world I inhabit should be when I
mhm,
talk about God. That
mhm,
is to say, it sets me on a existential journey
mhm,
of growth into conformity to
mhm,
that which is the very source of our being and goal of our strivings. And it
mhm,
seems to me that um, theologians are theologians because properly, because they're invested in the shape of their own lives
mm,
corresponding to the kind of vision that they're seeking to articulate. And in that sense, it seems to me that to be a theologian, one has and to theologize rightly, one has to have commitment
mhm,
to the way of life,
mhm,
to the pilgrimage. One has to be on the way. One doesn't have to be perfect. One
mhm,
will not be and cannot be perfect,
mhm,
but one has to be on that way.
mhm,
And in this way, one serving oneself, one receives an insight that can be of the help to
mhm,
others.
mhm, mhm. I remember during graduate school, I was very jealous of my friends who were like chemists. They're like,
Mm.
"Well, you just go to the lab and you run your experiments and record the results, and then you go home, and it makes no claim on your soul."
That's
But
exactly right.
when I turn on my reading lamp and I'm opening up X book, it's
Yeah,
making a claim on my very it's exhausting spiritually.
yeah, yeah,
If you really take this stuff seriously and what does it mean for me, you're like a spiritual Plato for a while.
yeah.
And God is faithful through that process and helps, but it is
On the
yeah.
other hand, it's a kind of exciting thing.
Oh, it's
Um,
yes, I wouldn't trade it for anything.
yeah, yeah.
Yep.
It is, and then the surprises that happen
Mhm,
uh, along the journey, insights that one receives, this interplay between life and the text that
mhm,
happens in the theological work itself. It's amazing. At one point, I was corresponding with a friend of mine, and then he commented how sometimes reading the Bible is boring when you just read it. And I said, that's my often my experience. If I just read it, it's not a great, really the greatest of all literatures, right? I can name to you texts that are much better literature, and this kind of after a while. You if you're looking for literary thrills, you're not going
mhm,
to find it there. But so sometimes I don't like to read the Bible, but I love to study the Bible.
mm,
Once you start studying and
mm.
going deeper, suddenly worlds open up
Yes,
that are tremendous
yes,
and amazing. And I mean, it's addictive to be a theologian.
yes. You know, I something you told me, I think in probably my first year of doctoral studies, it was something that you said, Jurgen told you, Jurgen Moltmann, that he said, "If I were to do it all over, I
Mm,
would maybe stick a little closer to the biblical text," or
yeah,
something like that.
yeah, yeah,
And that was very formative for me, and the reason that, biblical studies is really the center set of my
yeah,
work,
yeah.
even though I want to be a theologian, but I don't see those things as incompatible.
No, no.
One of my favorite books that you've written, actually, it's here on top of the stack. It's Captive to the Word of God, Engaging the Scriptures for Contemporary Theological Reflection. It's a beautiful book. Um, the phrase of the title comes from Martin
Mhm,
Luther,
mhm.
who said, "What a the diet of worms.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm my conscience is captive to the Word of God. I can do no other." So,
Here I stand. I
yes, here I stand.
can do
Yeah.
the other. Yeah.
How? Tell me about. Give us a window into your process as a thinker, as a writer, as a Christian, as a pilgrim, the role on a daily basis of the scriptures in your life. What does that look like?
Um, so I'm bad at disciplines.
Okay.
So,
Like spiritual disciplines?
well, I'm bad at disciplined, s disciplined spirit doing disciplined spiritual disciplines.
Okay.
That is to say, I'm gonna start the day with opening the Bible, reading the Bible or something like that, right?
Uh-huh.
Or even prayer. And I've tried to remedy that, uh, for quite some time. It never quite, I never quite succeed. I do for a while, and then I fall off
Mm,
the schedule, and then of course am disappointed in what how weak, feeble-willed I am when it comes to that. Um, so for most of what I do, what I write, um, kind of spirituality is intertwined in it,
mm, mhm,
and I almost never have a sense that I am kind of outside of that. For the times of prayer, I kind of alternate between, say, somebody gave me metal iron cross,
mhm,
pocket cross,
mhm,
and I often carry it with me. And when I touch it, I pray.
mhm,
I seek to create space
mm,
for crucified God in my life. Open myself to God.
mhm,
The same I have in my car. I have one of those um, Orthodox prayer beads
mhm.
hanging on my
A
rear
Kapuskini? I think those are what those are.
Kombuskini, exactly.
Yeah.
Mirror, and it's not a kind of amulet to protect me from some kind of
Right,
harm.
right.
It's really kind of identity marker and a
Mm,
reminder
mhm,
of who I am.
mm,
Um,
mhm,
and so those kinds of things, those kinds of prayers are mostly what my spiritual practices,
mhm,
disciplines
mhm,
consist
mhm.
of.
I think one of the resources theologically for the local church, especially like mainstream evangelical church, is the language of my personal relationship with God. Do you have a personal relationship with God? And the
Mhm.
whole idea is, well, if so, it would be personalized. It would
Mhm.
be so. Yes, so
Uh-huh,
discipline
yeah,
is a
that's
thing,
interesting.
but the idea that there's only one form to do this, and there's often certain pressures and almost like enneagram style. Like if you're an introvert, you're not going to be comfortable at this church. If you're an extrovert, you're not going to be comfortable
Yeah,
at this
yeah,
other church. And we generalize from idiosyncratic temperamental configurations, or whatever.
right.
But the idea of a personalized as personal relationship with God, I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
it takes a ton of pressure off, and it opens a
Very
lot
good
of
advice.
space for pilgrimaging. I mean, if I
Yeah.
pilgrimaged from here to where I grew up in Montana, I would walk through farm country, I would walk through mountains, I would walk along river valleys, I would walk in many different geographies, all on the same pilgrimage. Why, in my pilgrimage towards God, should there not be seasons that are some like this, and then seasons like that, and seasons like that? As a pastor, I'm eager for people not to foreclose the possibilities of
Yeah.
how one can experience God.
It's
Um,
very wise. You're a good pastor.
it helps me sometimes. Sometimes for me, my writing time is my time with God. Actually, I say, can
Mm.
I want this to be prayer,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
so please help me to do that, and then I'll disappear for a couple hours, and when I come back, I feel like I've met God.
Marvelous.
Uh, so there's so much to think about here, Miroslav. Maybe last question: if you were to think about what are some of the questions theologically, what are some of the issues that move people that you think the light of the gospel could still be shined more powerfully upon in going forward? What are some of those?
Yeah, that's a very very good question. I am, I'm thinking, I'm troubled about, and not knowing exactly how to think of the kind of future of humanity. That's a big question, but in particular, in the light of generative AI,
Mm,
what does it mean to be a human?
mhm,
What does it mean to be fragile,
mhm,
limited
mhm,
human being, and the beauty and goodness
mhm,
of this fragility?
mhm,
Um, some of the stuff that's happening in transhumanist experiments and thoughts
mhm,
seem like extensions of important trajectories of our desire,
mhm,
but they seem all designed to attenuate the
mm,
humanness, the
mhm,
temporal limitedness, fragility of what it means to be human in the here and now, um, who Jesus as the incarnate one was.
mhm,
And I think on that question,
mhm,
much needs to be done.
mhm,
Um, and especially, I think it's probably not for me to do the work like this. Somebody who's much more technologically
mm,
savvy,
mhm, mm,
or who can create conversations with technologically savvy folks,
mhm,
and take up that fundamental question of our time.
mhm. My I think about that a little bit too, because with the having some studied some theology and philosophy, I'm very interested in epistemology, the nature of intelligence qua intelligence.
Mm, mm,
And it seems that these conversations are really bracketing out or just unaware of a great deal of thought about what
sure.
intelligence, what even constitutes rationality. Why does that matter? And so it's like the A of the AI, or
Yeah,
excuse me,
yeah,
the I side.
yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah,
I think I want to think about, well, what is I?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
um and I think I don't know if it's in your writings or it all is kind of a smoothie in my head. But the idea of consciousness as a gift, and
Mm,
so
mm,
and you write, I think maybe in the conclusion of your book, Flourishing,
mm,
about how a gift. This is one of my favorite insights from you. How a gift is an object that is inscribed with a relationship. So
mm.
this coffee cup, if it just sat on the shelf in the supermarket, is just an object. It's a SKU, a shopkeeping unit. But if I buy it for you and I give it to you, now it's more than just an object.
Yeah,
It's a gift. And thinking about our human rationality as a gift from the giver, from the creator, and even thinking in some ways about us giving artificial intelligence its intelligence in some way.
yeah,
There's a
yeah,
certain sense in which, just as God creates creative creatures, so now we are creating creative creatures. And it's a certain extension of the Imago Dei into our
yeah,
technological inventions. Um, but I think there's I hope to see some creative and really deep thinking about what intelligence means at all.
yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
A lot of it, a reduction on simply instrumental reason.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly, and that's a yes. When is your new book coming out?
Probably in about a year,
Okay,
11 months or so, May,
okay,
beginning of May next year.
okay. So everybody listening to this, you should go buy it. You should pre-order it. Who's your publisher?
Brazos is.
Brazos. Okay, all right.
Yeah,
You've worked with them in the past as well.
yeah,
So
yeah,
next May, the publishing event of 2025, The Cost of Ambition. We'll be sure to get that.
very good.
Well,
Well, wonderful, wonderful to talk.
same,
Always.
same. Thank you so
Yeah.
much, Miroslav. Appreciate it. And friends, if you're listening, Deeper is a ministry of the Bay Church. We're in Concord, California. Well, Bay Area, we have a few campuses. Would love to see you sometime, either in person or online. Um, and until next time, be well, be theologians, and as the ancient rabbis say, shalom, me homies. Take care. Bye bye. Okay.
Fantastic.